Hello, everyone, and we're back. For those of you who weren't tuning in this morning, I'm Lindsay Monroe, and I do social strategy at Adobe. You can tell I work on XD a little bit. Can you? A little bit. Anyway. But you know what? I'm really grateful to have Catt Small with me in studio because I think I finally have someone with me who has more stickers on their laptop than I do. So everybody can talk about your stickers for once. Although, anyway, Catt, who are you?
Hi. Yeah, so I am a senior product designer at Etsy. I also make video games. I'm a huge advocate for just like underrepresented people in design and tech and video games as well. All of my work really centers around like helping creative people hopefully find their place and feel included within this wonderful world of just digital fun interaction.
Amazing. I think we should get a shout out to not only Catt, but also Etsy in the chat, because really, we love it. Like just two people, a company and a person that are supporting creators. We have so many people tuning in. They're really into the stickers. Not surprised. We have a lot of sticker enthusiasts in our network. Hi Daniel, thanks for tuning in. We got Daniel White. Do you know Forever Dansky online?
Ooh,
anyway, he's here. That's great. Glad everybody's into the stickers. So, you know, I think we need to get the shoes out of the way.
Oh God,
mostly
yes.
because, you know, Catt has a lot of things to say and she is definitely more than her shoes, but
my shoes are pretty
they
cool.
are pretty amazing. So I think we're gonna have to hook up a GoPro shot of the shoes. Let's see if we can get in there and do this. This is a really sophisticated situation. Okay, are we showing off the shoes? Is everyone seeing these? Okay, awesome. And you can see my not so exciting shoes. Let's just not. Okay. Wow, awesome. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, everybody, really exciting. So Catt, you said you're a senior product designer at Etsy. So can you tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like, and then maybe we can dig into, say, a project you've worked on?
Yeah. So every day is kind of different, I suppose, for most product designers. But generally, so the nice thing is that I sit with my product manager and I sit with the team of engineers that I work with, and they're all really wonderful people. So yeah, like usually what we're thinking about is maybe we're working on a current project, or we're trying to figure out future projects to work on, and we're really trying to think about like ways that we can help the sellers that we work for. So in my case, I specifically work on the marketing services team, and what they do is they help sellers figure out ways to market themselves to buyers and like find potential shoppers for their store. Cool. So yeah, a lot of the things we're thinking about are just ways to make their lives easier and help them connect to other people. Yeah, and we also work a lot, like very closely with like researchers and people within the marketing space as well, just to figure out ways to like communicate in terms of our projects. So a day-to-day is kind of like figuring out like research, thinking about who we need to talk to, if we're solving the right problems, if we're answering the right questions. There's a fair amount of meetings depending on the day as well, but you know, of course, we're like really trying to make sure that we're like delivering the best product to the people that we're creating things for. And then, of course, I usually get like at least maybe 3 to 4 hours of like heads down design time on a good day to just kind of like really hash out my thoughts and make sure that I'm able to communicate with everyone, because part of being a product designer is really about facilitating conversations between others and like pulling out those ideas and then bringing them to life.
Fantastic. Wow. That's like, sounds like you're a busy lady. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't we dive into a project that you've worked on at Etsy that you're proud of, and you can talk a little bit about the thinking behind it and any sort of considerations you made in the design.
Yeah, let's do it. So very specifically, I picked out Etsy Payments. Before I was on the marketing services team, I worked on the payments team, and I really thought this project would resonate with the theme of like inclusive design, because we basically had to figure out a way to transition millions of users to a new payments platform.
Okay.
So before Etsy mostly used like PayPal and things like that, and then we had to figure out like our team had to figure out how to properly transition over a bunch of people and make sure that they felt included and listened to and supported, so that payments could become so much easier and much more protected on Etsy.
And was that just when you were thinking about this, were you thinking about just the sellers or your users as well?
Yeah, we were thinking about both of the audiences. So we were thinking about sellers and trying to figure out how to communicate to them and make sure that they felt like they understood why the change was being made and how to actually onboard. And then we also had to think about how to communicate to buyers in terms of why Etsy payments is a good thing for them and how it makes sure that their purchases are protected and things like that. So mostly what I'm going to be talking about is the experience of communicating to sellers, because I thought that was incredibly interesting. And it took a lot of work to kind of go through the process of making sure that we were saying the right thing.
Understood. And you have a very global audience, both sellers and users.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that had some unique challenges. But
totally.
Let's dig into this and we can touch upon that too.
Yeah. So one of course, the first things that we did was we needed to sit down. It was a team of me and a product manager, product marketing. We had a product education manager as well to figure out how we were going to communicate. And then I also tried to pull in some engineers so that we were making sure that we were hearing them as early as possible.
Oh, great.
So that was awesome. And we sat down together and we did a bunch of different sketching sessions. This is just one of a couple of many ideas that we actually shared during that process. So once we'd kind of talked about all of our ideas and picked out the things that we thought were like most worth diving into further, what we did next is I pulled those ideas into a user flow diagram so that I could communicate it with people who aren't designers, who think in a more systematic way, so that I could show lots of different states that users would potentially move through. And we found that there were about 5 different user states to think about, so it was really valuable to have a diagram that I could quickly show to people. So that was a really crucial part of this process, because it then let people kind of point things out and say, I think maybe we should consider what are the different kinds of people who are maybe not in eligible countries, people who are in an eligible country but who aren't using Etsy at all yet, things like that.
So when you start your design process, do you find you normally start with like a rough sketch, like the way you did originally, and then you move into the more refined user workflow diagram?
Yeah, usually I think it's very important to start on paper, or just to not start in the digital space, because once you get into digital, it can be really hard to, you get really obsessed with the very small things. And so even when it came to this user flow, I was thinking about how much space is between things and stuff like that.
The designer comes out in you.
Right. So I find it much easier to just stick with very rough, ugly sketches. And I even only use a pen so that I am kind of forced to accept the imperfections of my work.
Yeah, it looks like we have some agreements amongst our viewers here.
Yeah.
Pickled neuron.
Paper.
Paper rules.
Paper.
So great, so
yeah.
great. And you also made mention of a diagram like this being really good for communicating with non-designers.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure that's really crucial to what you're doing, and also ensuring that you're addressing all user needs as well, right?
Yeah, we definitely have to make sure that we're all on the same page. We need to have the same dialogue and have the same dictionary of words that we're using. Otherwise, it becomes really complicated. So it's so much better to talk to people earlier and make sure that as a designer, we're thinking about ways to really blend our ideas together and just really make sure that we're all aligned as a team.
Got it. And when you're working on a diagram like this, are you working with many designers, or is this something that you find you're working on solo?
Yeah, at Etsy, the team is pretty small in terms of designers. So usually there's about maybe one, I'm the sole designer on the projects that I'm working on, but I do get to work with other designers pretty often and make sure that I'm getting feedback from them. So in this case, what I usually share with other designers for feedback is sketches and things like that, and maybe not potentially a user flow, as that they're not really the audience in that case, but I do usually have design documentation section where other designers can actually go in and read this kind of thing if they're interested in seeing this level of granularity. But very often I would show them like the next couple of steps.
Very cool. All right. So you found 5 user workflows essentially when mapping this out. And then what was your next step from there?
Yeah, so what we did next is we tried to further figure out, once we defined those 5 groups of people, what kind of content we wanted to show so that we can make sure that everyone involved, so for example, the product marketing people, they needed to understand what content they were going to start writing. So by having this setup here, it was really easy to kind of share with them and show them like what content is going to stay the same across the different groups, what content is going to change. And that was really helpful for just everyone to start thinking about also the modularity of the project. So we needed to make sure that when we built this, we actually also made it very easy to change. And then we also needed to think about things like translations as well. So that was, it was a really fun and it was a much meatier project.
I was going to say, it sounds like you have a lot of things to sort of sink your teeth into there. Before we continue talking about this, we do have a couple questions here. Someone was wondering, are you on Behance or Instagram? Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm definitely on Instagram at the Catt Suite. I believe I do have a Behance too. It's also Catt Small. You can like look it up. I'm on Twitter at Catt Small. Pretty much almost everything is at Catt Small. Yeah.
So it's CATT Small.
Yes.
It's perfect. Easy to get to.
Yeah.
Good morning to everyone that's tuning in. I'm Lindsay Monroe and I'm chatting with Catt Small. We're going through one of her projects that she worked on when redesigning the payment system at Etsy.
Yeah. So awesome. Yeah. So once we'd figured out the different content modules that we were working with, what I did next was then I started kind of you can kind of see the process of me going from a very wireframey, low fidelity design all the way to a much higher fidelity design. So the 2 on the left were ones that were done in the same program, and they were both not at all like coded or anything like that. Right. But then the one on the right was one that I actually prototyped in code. We have like a lot of systems at Etsy to make it easy for designers to be able to program, which is really nice because then you can start to like see things like responsive design, which is really, really fun to work with. And that's like one of the best parts for me is like really starting to prototype things and figure out like the interaction and thinking about just ways that we can make this more fun for people.
So when we were talking about you coming on today, we plugged all of your many talents, including the fact that you are, you have coding chops. Like, yes. So you're not only, you don't only do the UX stuff, the design stuff, but also coding as well. Do you find you're doing that a bit in your work? You mentioned that you coded this prototype versus using some sort of tool.
Yeah. So I find that maybe about 25%, if I had to quantify it, 25% of my work maybe involves some programming, and usually it's just like very like basic like HTML, CSS, and maybe some like rudimentary JavaScript stuff just to show like how someone clicks through things. And that's just because my background personally has, I got started on like doing web design like maybe over 10 years ago at this point, oh God. And back then it was like, I mean, there was something really nice about like typing stuff in and then seeing the results of it on screen. If I were just like starting out nowadays, like maybe I would do things differently, but I do think it's really nice that I can communicate with engineers in that way where I can say, hey, like change this class name, or like the floats are not working because you need to add this clear, or things like that. Like I can communicate very well with other people on my team because I know what they're working with.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you an eye roller.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an age-old question, and the chat should definitely feel free to weigh in on this too. Should designers learn to code?
I think
you saw that question coming, right? Did you see it? Yeah.
So my opinion about whether or not designers need to code is that I think it's nice to have at least a low level understanding. So like very basic, like how do things work and why do they work that way? Because it makes it easier to communicate with other people. And it just shows you that it shows people that you're invested in what they're doing and that you really care about the work that they are creating. And I think the other thing that's nice about it that maybe is also becoming less of a thing now, especially as like CSS grid becomes a part of the standard, is that before, like, layout issues would happen if a designer didn't know how code worked. And so, like, the nice thing is that that's becoming a lot easier now, but I do think that because those kinds of future forward CSS class names and properties are not supported across the board yet, so we need to make sure that we as designers are knowledgeable if we're going to be working in the web space. And same for mobile designers as well. Like, it's really important to just know the base level to make sure that you're communicating in a knowledgeable way.
Yeah, and understanding that what you're creating will translate, right?
Right, exactly,
Yeah, okay.
because it's so disappointing if you make something that can't be built.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. All right.
So sad.
sad.
So yeah, what we did during this process also I want to mention is that we did a lot of user research, and that was super valuable here to figure out how we were communicating with people, if we weren't answering some questions, if we needed to do things like include a calculator, for example, which was an idea, one of the many ideas that got cut. But like, it was cool to see like what things we needed to include and what features people didn't actually want or the feedback they didn't need. So what we did once we got that feedback from people is we actually launched the site. So you can see here that this is the modified version. You can kind of see the transition from this all the way to here. We ended up reducing a lot of the pink, which is one of my favorite colors, and so it makes me very sad. But it turned into a much more like a page that, like, that's an example of me having a thing that I like that maybe doesn't translate to what other people want. And so one of the things we definitely did was we cut down on some of the colors that people said maybe didn't feel safe for them. We made sure that we were communicating in a way that spoke directly to people and kind of like we weren't like holding their hand in the way that we thought we maybe had to. So it was very cool to get that feedback from people and see that people really just wanted us to talk to them straight and like just give them the details so that they could make the decisions for themselves.
Fantastic. And we did talk about how you had a very global audience when rolling this out. What did the user research process look like for that? And what were your challenges, especially even just the language translations?
Yeah, so we tested with US users and then we also tested with some international users. I think the things that were really challenging was definitely like figuring out, how do we communicate to different audiences? I think the other things that were interesting was to hear the challenges that non-US users faced. So did they need things like talking about that or other things that we as people in the US don't really have to think about? So I really enjoyed hearing feedback from them. It was very challenging.
That is the taxing system in most of Europe, right?
Yeah, value-added tax, yes, good point. And yeah, I think the other thing that was interesting was just figuring out like, okay, so how long do load times take for people in other countries? There were things like, if I wanted to watch the user tests, like they were all over the place in terms of timing. But yeah, it was just interesting to listen to other people and see how research is done in different locations, and then also figuring out the translations for this. Like we had to make sure that we, shared the strings that we were using, the text strings, at least like maybe a week in advance or so that like all of the translations could be done across the different audiences that we have.
Yeah, so I'm Canadian and I did some print work really early in my career and we had to translate everything to French and everything was 50% longer.
Yeah, you never know. German.
It was when you're doing a bilingual brochure, it gets real tricky. You got to get really creative with your design work because you don't want one side with size 10 font and the other with 14.
I've definitely learned that like you never want to force text not to wrap because German is always going to destroy everything that you do, which is great. And I love German for that reason. Like the words are just like so long, but like very succinct, but also so long, which makes it so challenging.
That's great. Cool.
Awesome.
So let's talk about inclusive design. I wanted to get your take on that. So what does inclusive design mean to you?
Yeah, inclusive design to me means making sure that I'm considering audiences who maybe don't look like me or think like me, maybe have different abilities than I do. And that's a really important part of my work, making sure that it's accessible, that we're testing with as many different types of people as we can from different backgrounds. It's really just making sure that you're going the extra step and considering people who maybe aren't like you.
There's a lot of people who aren't like me.
Yeah, so, turns out there are millions
there's
of them.
lots of them. Everybody's different. We are all special flowers.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So just really making sure that even if it's things like copywriting, considering like who you're representing in terms of the illustrations in your work, making sure that the words that you're using are like words that feel good for you to use. I've definitely seen some like weird marketing campaigns where it's been like, we're using a meme and people are like, why are you using that? That's super weird.
We've all seen some very cringeworthy stuff that has gone out. I mean, I'd like to say that Adobe's never used the word "they" in anything. I'd just like to put that out there.
Oh no.
But yeah, as far as I know.
We've all been guilty of it at some point, and I think it's about learning that, you know, like learning the boundaries and learning the lines and figuring out, like we all make mistakes, and I think it's about like learning from them, and I think that's why user testing is so important and why I really, really value it in my process, is because, you know, if you sometimes you miss things, and by reaching out to other people and asking them for feedback, you can figure out like, oh, that is something I did not even think about. Like, oh, the contrast is impossible, or like, oh, these words are weird and don't make sense to someone who is not working directly with this. So I think it's really, really valuable, and I think inclusion, you know, is like it means a lot and it encompasses a lot, and I think it's really valuable to just really just make sure that you're checking yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, I know even at Adobe we've moved away from just defining it as universal design or accessible design, because that doesn't really cover all the bases. Like inclusive design truly does look at everything, right? I think for a long time we weren't taking into consideration like gender or age or you know, it was very much focused on ability, and that's
one facet.
Yeah, that's like one facet. That's one piece of the puzzle, you know. So yeah, no, that's great. So do you have any like really shining examples of good inclusive design you want to talk about?
Yeah, so of course I had to plug Etsy because, but I think we really try very hard.
I think we've shared our love for Etsy here.
Yeah,
you know?
like we try really hard to support different languages, to communicate differently in different languages. We try to make sure that the content that we're sharing with different audiences in different countries are useful and valuable for them. So like, for example, the other day I took the screenshot, and in some countries you see things about sororities, and in other countries you see things about like seasonal decor instead, which is like, whoa, cool. And then we also do small things like making sure that the photos that we're featuring and the sellers that we're featuring are from lots of different places. Also, if you tab around our site, you can actually just like tab and navigate with a keyboard, which is amazing and awesome. And very recently we also did a ton of work to make sure that our buttons and all of our text is accessible and like easy to read for people who maybe don't have like 20/20 eyesight or can't see contrast in the same way that I can. So yeah, we do a lot of work to really make sure that we are welcoming everyone to the site.
100%. Yeah, no, that's great. That's a wonderful example.
Yeah, tears of joy.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo.
And I also wanted to note that it can be very, very small things too. Like you don't have to have the scale of users or have the number of employees that Etsy has. You can do super small things like making sure that you're looking at like who, if you have an add to Slack button, for example, if you like think about who is represented in the illustrations that you're making, the skin tones of people that you're thinking about, the ages that you're representing. It can be all kinds of things, and they can be very, very minuscule changes even. And this change, for example, that Slack made, a lot of people noticed it, and it like kind of caused like a tweet storm in a positive way. People were like, oh my God, like this is really cool to see like a brown hand holding a Slack button, and it's like the tiniest little thing that someone just did on a whim, but it really represented a lot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any great examples?
Yeah.
Throw those in the chat. We will definitely look at it. Maurice was saying that one of Slack's designers Diogenes Brito was the one behind that. So that's great. Shout out to them. Cool. Very cool.
Awesome. Yeah, and then I have two more that are super interesting to consider. One is Airbnb Design has had this exhibition or this installation called Shadow to Light, and they translated it to a web experience. So definitely check this out. It's a toolkit that encourages you to kind of like challenge your assumptions and think outside of what you know, which I thought was really, really interesting, and just kind of a cool way to push forward the conversation of design. And then one last one, if you're interested in thinking about ways to be more accessible, I thought this website that had a toolkit of components that you can use, it provides guidance on things like tables, it provides guidance on things like form fields and all kinds of different components and ways to make them more accessible and inclusive to people who have different levels of abilities.
Awesome. So when we look at something like inclusive components, it definitely sort of serves more of an engineer audience,
right?
Correct? When it comes to designers, like what are the things that you're consulting or referring to when it comes to making your designs more inclusive? Like, do you have any resources that you can think of off the top of your head that you go to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, so at Etsy, there's like a lot of internal, there are like a lot of internal tools for like in making sure that things are both accessible and like making sure that you're reaching a varied audience. I think outside of that, it can be a little bit more challenging. I do a lot of reading, to be honest, to make sure that I'm thinking about things. I would actually plug, so Sarah Wachter-Becher has a really cool book that's called Technically Wrong, and I read that one, and it really blew my mind in terms of just thinking about the way that we design systems and the way that we communicate with people, making sure that the messaging that we're using is really clear and that we're not hurting people. So for example, if you're designing an app that is for monitoring your weight, maybe not congratulating people when they lose weight all the time because maybe they just had a baby or something, and that's a little weird. So it really challenged my thinking in terms of just making sure that I'm not just considering the positive situations, that I'm really thinking across the board about like all the ways that someone might come to find my project.
Fantastic, yeah. No, I mean, I imagine it's like one of those things where you're continually educating yourself. I mean, going and reading some literature on it just in celebration of World Interaction Design Day is a great start, or attending one of our many events today is all a good thing. I think, part of it is just like staying up on your game and making sure you're covering all bases. Very cool. So, as an IC design leader, how do you champion inclusive design from within a company? And why don't you talk a little bit about what that is, what it means, and yes.
Yeah. So for me, that happens in a couple of ways. I do a fair amount of like trying to like mentor people and make sure that I'm like providing a voice as someone who is a woman of color, who is a designer and has been a designer for like over 10 years and has made lots of wonderful mistakes to learn from. Generally, what I try to do is just make sure that I'm asking questions. I'm asking, who are we serving here? Who's not benefiting from the work that we're doing? What are ways that we can make sure that everyone's benefiting? What risks are we okay with taking? Really just asking the hard questions and making sure that they all have answers, because I think that makes us much better as people and results in much better designs. So yeah, it's really about just making sure that I'm pushing the conversation and encouraging other people to do the same. So I think it's really important it's really like not just being the only person, like making sure that you're cultivating an environment where other people can also do the same.
Do you feel like you need to be a senior level designer in order to do that?
Ooh, doubt it. No, gladly no. Any person at any level can and should be asking these questions. And I think it, again, is really important to point out that like inclusion is a multifaceted thing. You can be a person of color, you can be any of the many different factors of what it means to be, you know, like everyone's different really, but I think we all bring something different to the table, and we all need to make sure that we're having conversations about the different qualities that make us human and wonderful, and figuring out like how can we design better for people, knowing the things that we know and having the experiences that we have. So regardless of your level, even if you're a junior designer, you can bring up really good points and give feedback and say, for example, hey, this onboarding documentation is really confusing for me, or you can say, hey, like someone in my generation maybe won't understand what you're trying to say here, and things like that. So everyone has something to bring to the table and to the conversation, and it's so important to make sure that we all are contributing and feel like we have the space to do that.
I mean, at the end of the day, if Etsy wants us all to be users, that's why we would all listen, right? And that goes, I shouldn't just say Etsy, like it'd be like anybody,
all companies.
Right?
Every company needs to make sure that they're really considering.
Every company, yeah. So have you ever faced any backlash in your effort to make the companies you've worked for more inclusive? You don't obviously have to name anything or be specific. And if so, like, how did you overcome that?
That's a great question. I think one very interesting project that had a weird result was I made this website with some friends called blackgamedevs.com, and we made it because people kept asking us, like, where are all the Black game developers? And we were like, hey, they're right here. You can give them your money. It's pretty easy. You just have to look for them. So like, we were just like, let's make a thing and show some examples of really cool people. And people reacted, so some people were like, oh my God, this is amazing, and then other people were like, white game devs, what about us? And we were like, okay.
We've seen that scenario play out in a few different ways.
They are also people too. But we were like, that's not the point. And
I don't think I've ever heard anyone pose the question, we're all the white game developers.
Right, it's like, we know where they are, and that's why we wanted to make this thing, so that people could have other people to look at too. You know, it's like we want to support everyone, and so that was an interesting conversation that we started, and I think that's the only major backlash that I've had in all the projects that I've worked on, which has been really wonderful that like most of the projects that I've done have resulted in a lot of positive conversation.
So whatever happened with that project?
It's still alive.
Just
I think the backlash kind of like eventually died down, and people realized, oh, this is why we need stuff like this, because there aren't a lot. There were like 100 of people that we maybe got on the list, and I think more people, but by seeing that there were some game developers of color, people realized like, oh cool, like I can do this too.
It's not a myth.
Right, like they are here, and we can support them, and we should have more, and we should make more cool games.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a chat to win right now, I think. Is that what all the fireworks are for? I think so. Yes, it's chat to win. So you guys know the drill. Type diversity in the chat. Diversity. Spell it any way you want. We'll accept it. All right, so diversity, spell it any way you want, drop it in the chat. We're gonna be selecting a winner momentarily. I like the fireworks, are really they
so
get
cute.
really exciting. We're giving away beautiful hardcover Moon notebooks. So get in on this. All right, there we go. There's a little plug. If you guys are familiar with Moo print materials, particularly the business cards with the round corners. I think they come in other
beautiful stuff.
But they make beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
They really do.
They have
really
some
do.
like
They
gold
do well.
ones, and I was like, should I be really extra?
Oh,
Probably
you
not.
should. No, you should. You should.
Oh, fine.
I was like, yes. With those shoes, you need a business card
You're
to
right.
match.
You're
Yes,
right. You're right. I have to go
100%.
all the way every time.
So into it. Are those an Etsy purchase or no?
Oh, I wish. Yeah.
No.
Unfortunately, not. But they are so beautiful, and just they make me so happy.
So fun.
Yeah.
I love it. Cool. So we're processing. Extra with the business cards. We have yours. We have support on that from Andrea. We'll go back to Lindsay's question about how you address accessibility for the disabled in the website. We touched upon that, but we can definitely loop back. We've got a lot of excitement. Okay, it looks like we have a winner. Do you want to say the name?
Dun, 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 dun.
It's up there.
Oh, yes.
On there.
Danilo Asanin.
Congrats,
Yay.
congrats. We will be in touch with you via Behance messaging, and we'll get your info and get you your prize. Thank you.
Congrats, Danilo.
Thank you. Cool. So why don't we flip back to the question that Lindsay in the chat asked before all of the excitement sort of poured in. So what are some of the ways that you address accessibility for the disabled? Let's use Etsy as an example. We can touch upon a few of the things.
Yeah. So in addition to cool sites like inclusive components, some of the things that I think a lot about are making sure that I'm, again, considering contrast and making sure that the colors that we're using are not clashing in a way that makes it hard to read things, making sure that we're thinking a lot about the ability for people to tab through the site without actually needing to use a mouse, for example, making sure that we're also supporting screen readers, because that is a very often forgotten thing as well. And then, like really thinking about the smaller things, like when it comes to using keyboards and stuff, like you need to make sure that everything has an outline. So we try really hard not to like do the outline none thing that a lot of designers maybe are like, oh, this thing has like a thing when you focus on it and it looks gross and it's like a blue outline, but it's like some people really, really need that.
They
so
really
like
need it.
Make sure that you're actually including those kinds of things. So it's all the small things and really asking like, okay, why is this thing here and like who is it for? But yeah, those are the things that I think about pretty often, like really just making sure that I'm considering people who maybe don't have the same ability as I do and the same ability to see in the way that I can.
Great. You said an interesting point there. Do you ever struggle as a designer where you truly have to put function before form?
Yes, yes, quite often. It turns out that something that I designed looks really good, but at the same time doesn't work in the way that I thought it would, or like doesn't communicate the thing that I thought it would. And that's again why I think testing is really important. What I try to do is test, like that happened very often when I wasn't testing enough. And now what I try to do is really figure out like what questions do people actually have? What do they need to know to get the tasks done? Really making sure that I'm talking to people early and often to confirm that the ideas that I have and the biases that I have are like working for me and not against me. So I just make sure that I communicate a lot with the people that we're gonna be designing things for, and then putting all of my designs in front of them and really just listening to them. And if they don't understand it, then that means that the design has failed and I need to try again and figure out a way to make it more valuable, more useful. So yeah, I tend to definitely focus more on making sure that the things that I am designing actually communicate what I want them to communicate, and then I try to make sure that they also look really good.
Right.
Yeah.
So don't skimp on the research or user testing, guys. I think that's like the takeaway here.
Totally.
Let's really
talk to people.
Focus on that.
Yes.
So jumping forward to mentorship.
Yeah.
You have mentored a number of junior designers.
Yeah.
How did you get started doing that? And one thing, the reason I ask that is because I've heard from various people that they're never quite sure at what point in their career they feel equipped or knowledgeable enough or confident enough to feel like they can.
Yeah, like I said earlier, like it really is a thing that can happen at any point in time. I think it's about communicating with people. The thing that I think about when it comes to mentorship is looking for opportunity, like learning what people want to do and how they want to grow, and then looking for opportunities to actually help them do that. So that's why I think this comic is really important. It's one that I drew, and it basically is outlining the difference between like very basic mentorship, which is kind of asking people like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And then there's sponsorship, which is like, hey, I heard about this thing and I suggested that you do it. And I think there's a really beautiful thing that happens when you start actually, pushing for other people in terms of helping them grow and making sure that they're also getting opportunities, because it becomes more of a thing that you eventually, hopefully, both are doing for each other. I think there's something really interesting about the concept of mentorship because it kind of implies that one person's mentoring and the other is the mentee. But for me, it's like I'm learning from them as they're learning from me as well. So I think that's why it's really important that all designers are doing that for each other, and all people are, helping each other in that way. So that's how I view mentorship, and I just want to support others and like figure out how I can invest in them.
Great. And do you think that there is an appropriate sort of career gap, if you will, within those relationships? I heard someone quote at one point in time that about 5 years is good either way, because pairing someone super junior with someone super senior, either is not going to really benefit, whereas like having someone who just needs that sort of leg up into that next phase of their career, that's more appropriate. Have you had any experience with that or any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, it can be really challenging if someone can't understand your perspective anymore. And part of it for me, I think, is about maintaining that sense of like innocence in a way, or maintaining that ability to be empathetic. So I feel like even if you're a super duper senior designer, that if you understand or remember what it was like to be a junior designer who was confused and didn't get everything, then that's the thing, that's the key. Like, you can mentor anyone at any level, I believe. But it really, for me, is about like making sure that I understand other people. And that's why, again, I think it's also really important that I'm talking to people who are like much more junior than I am, because it just makes sure that I'm keeping kind of a grip on reality in a way. So I definitely, I think that anyone can do it, but it really does, it takes like experience and the ability to remember what you were like at that point.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I don't know about you, but like, I feel like I can remember where I was 5 years ago, but 10, like, I try to forget.
Good times. Bad times.
I am watching the chat too, so if you guys have any questions for Catt, please drop them in there. Also, hello, Naomi. Thank you for tuning in. Hello, Anel. All of these people, thank you so much for your comments. It seems like Lindsay was into your accessibility tips too. Also, great name. So, when in your mentoring, like, what's one thing you've seen junior designers do that every time you cringe and you're like, if you were to sort of give one piece of blanket advice, which that's really not what we're about today of all days, but
all good.
If you were to give one sort of piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it's really important to communicate and remember that other people don't always have the same perspective as you. And what I mean by that is that I've seen a lot of more junior designers, in terms of just like the way that they're thinking, maybe it's not, maybe they've been working for a long time, but they haven't realized that like they can't always, like, as a designer, sometimes you have to throw away your ideas because they're maybe not great. Like, you thought they were great, but they're not. And that's why it's really important to talk to other people, making sure that you're talking to people early, hearing different perspectives. And that's just a thing that you learn with time, but has incredibly benefited me over the years. Just making sure that I'm hearing from other people who are maybe like product managers or engineers who have a different perspective, and making sure that I'm really considering why they're saying those kinds of things. Like, hey, like, maybe they're giving me feedback that something doesn't work, and it's not because they're not good at their job or because they're not designers. It's really because they are concerned that, like, maybe this layout doesn't work, or they just have a different perspective. And it's important to not just like push your ideas forward, but also make sure that you understand where they're coming from, and sometimes you have to compromise. And that's the thing that I definitely learned with time that I wish I understood sooner, that it's not an us versus them. We all have the same goals, and we all want to hopefully launch the same thing together.
And probably part of that too is asking questions, right?
Yeah.
So like, maybe it's listening, but also understanding.
Right, yeah, just digging in. I think the one major thing that one question I started asking more is like, why did you say that, or where is this coming from, or like, what are you thinking about, and that question has helped to just helped me a lot in terms of how I communicate with people. And I think people trust and understand me more because I am, asking them to explain themselves, and really, I just want to understand them more.
So you learn.
So
you grow.
Yeah.
100%. So mentorship is definitely not being the only way you've given back. You've already mentioned one example, but you've done a ton of volunteer work.
Yeah.
Initiatives is a good way to sum it up. why don't we walk through some of that, talk a little bit about it. We can maybe inspire the folks watching on how they can make a difference too using their skill set.
Yeah, cool. So some of the things I do outside of Etsy, number one, I mentioned I'm a game developer. So I help to run a group called Brooklyn Gamery. I'm 1/3 of that set of people. And what we do is we make games, but we also organize events that hopefully encourage people to make more interesting games. So firstly, one of the most recent games that we made was called Breakup Squad. It's so cute. It's a very, very cute game. And in it, 3 friends try to keep 2 exes from meeting again and reuniting at a party. So it's a very fun 5-player team-based game. It's super duper cute. The music is super great and it just feels really fun to play. So that's one thing that we did. And then in terms of events that we've run, we have run the Game Devs of Color Expo for 3 years now. And every year it's had more and more people show up, which has been a super beautiful experience. So yeah, we not only showcase lots of really, really cool games, and we every year it's curated. So you're seeing the things that we as game designers believe are super awesome and need to be shown to other people. But we also make sure that we're highlighting speakers of color in the game space, and there are tons. There are tons of amazing, smart people who haven't always been given the opportunity or didn't know how to go through the application process in terms of getting onto conference stages. So what we do is we did a lot of outreach, and we made sure that we were communicating with people to really show them hey, this is how you show your game at stuff. This is how you get into conferences. And hopefully, we've seen a lot of people from there actually go on to do way bigger, cooler things. So it's been awesome to help and kind of give people a platform in front of 400, 500 people.
It must feel so good.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so much work, but really, really worth it.
It's a labor of love, right?
Yeah. This past year, I kind of took a break to let other people run it, which was really amazing to see something that I helped out with come to life and kind of live without me. And that's what I think is the most important part, is that I'm not the only part of this, you know?
Well,
I'm I'm one of many human beings involved.
And that I think just really reinforces the importance of it and the value of it to the community it serves.
People still wanted it.
Yeah, it
always
will continue on without you, right? Because people, they have as much heart in the situation as you do, which is great. Well, I don't know if I want to go that far, but anyway. So in the example you shared just before this, you made some special considerations that in designing this game that I feel would be really useful to highlight. So for those tuning in, they have some thoughts about where they could start.
Yeah, a lot of the things we thought about were so all of the characters they have gender neutral names. We don't refer to them with any gender attached. They're a variety of different people. It was really about making sure that the character design was anyone could play and find themselves in the game. And I thought that was a really fun approach.
Love is love and breakups are breakups.
Right, breakups are breakups, and we all, most of us experience them unless you are a romantic. But we really wanted to highlight that this is a universal experience for people, and it's a super hilarious, weird game, and pretty much everyone who's played it has loved it.
Yeah, it's great. Anyway, we have a question from Miriam. Do you have any advice from someone moving from senior designer to art director?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely try to communicate with the directors at Etsy in terms of design direction as often as possible, just so they can learn from them, because they're super smart and cool. I would say that one of the major things is really upping your communication skills, because the more senior you get, the more you're going to be talking to people, the better you need to be at making sure that you can get your point across. And that's something I totally still struggle with, figuring out how to make sure that people understand what I'm trying to say, but also at the same time making sure that I'm not micromanaging them, and that's a huge challenge. But as you get closer to being in a director role, you need to make sure that you are giving people the autonomy and space to do the work that they need, but that they understand what the standards are and what they should be aiming for.
Perfect. That sounds about right to me.
Good luck.
Good luck. Cool. So You have more examples to share. We did the Brightest Squad.
Yes.
Brooklyn Gamery.
Yes. Another project that I didn't mention earlier is Good for POC.
Yeah.
So this one, it started out as a list of companies that were highlighted for, like, we'd done a survey, and we did a survey of like a lot of people, and we got feedback about companies that they worked at and thought that were really inclusive and like trying to do good work in the space and making sure that people of color could come to work and feel like they could just do their job, and that they weren't you know, being discriminated against or felt like they were just different.
Right.
And like when that happens at work, you start to focus more on how you're interacting with people than actually doing your job. So it's really valuable to make sure that not just people of color, of course, but like queer people and people who are marginalized in other ways, like we all have our own struggles in terms of making sure that we don't feel like we're uncomfortable or like we're not supposed to be there. And so we wanted to see if we could find companies that were doing a good job according to other people and highlight them. And the thing that we realized as we were going through it is that sometimes we would highlight a company and then someone else would send a report in and we would verify it that like something bad happened, and we were kind of like, okay, well, this is really challenging to do well, and we maybe are not the best people to do that well. There are a lot of other people in the space right now who are doing a much better job, and they have the time and ability to join in and actually go into companies and mentor them. So we realized that we wanted to let those companies do that kind of work, and we wanted to start focusing more on figuring out other ways that we as designers and engineers of color can contribute to the space and in a valuable way. So we decided after a lot of thinking to close the site, and instead, like, we had a lot of donations, so what we're doing instead is donating that money to people of color so that they can go to conferences and other educational opportunities. So if you're someone who is interested in potentially attending a conference or a class or something like that, we have a small amount of money that we can give away to make sure that people can actually attend these things.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that in the end it still served a really positive purpose.
Yeah,
you know,
like people...
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I mean, I don't even want to say lesson learned, but you know, when you can imagine how in very large companies the experience could be very different from team to team, from office to office, and yeah.
Yeah, it turns out it's I think we thought about it in such a like singular, very simple way, and as we worked on it more, we realized, oh, this is really complicated. And it's interesting because I was talking to someone who recently presented at XOXO. Her name is Yeli, and she talked about this thing called creative savior complex, and it basically means like you're a creative human being and you want to figure out some way to solve a problem, and we definitely did that in this case where we were like, things are bad, let's make a website for it, and we realized it was more complicated than that. So we definitely learned a lot from this project, and in this case we were able to turn it into something good by giving that money to people. And if you're interested in applying for the scholarship, then you can go to goodforpocin.tech. And that's the link.
Great. I think we have like one more example to walk through.
Yes, and the last one is Code Liberation. So this one is currently based in London. I helped start it in New York, and it's an organization that helps women and non-binary and femme and other girl-identifying people to learn to code. Specifically, we started with video games, and we mostly did video games because they're fun and people like them, and they're not tied to, they are still like a source of income for people, but that's how I learned to make websites, is like I made a dress-up doll game first, and then I found out that web development was a thing and you can make a job out of it. And so we're kind of, you know, helping people learn in a space that is not as scary and not as intimidating to work with. So there are events that happen in London mostly at this point, and I haven't been involved in a couple of years, but it's been really cool to, again, like see this grow from there. And a lot of the lessons that we've taught over the years are also available online, which is really cool. So you can go to codeliberation.org if you're interested in learning more and seeing our giant backlog of lessons for free.
Amazing. We have a couple minutes left, and I want to just ask you, you know, Any advice for designers looking to give back, to start the next code liberation or what have you?
Yeah, I think what's really important is making sure that you're really considering your audience and thinking about your space in the world, looking and doing your research. Like, again, like underscoring the research thing. In a lot of cases, we needed to make sure that we actually looked up, like, who's doing stuff in this space? Is someone already doing something? How can we contribute? With Code Liberation, like, no one was really at the time doing that. This was like several years back, and there weren't really a lot of opportunities like that in the US specifically or in London. So it's definitely like continue to grow because it's such a niche space and people really need things like this. But in other cases, I think we realized, okay, maybe this isn't the best tactic for approaching the problem, and we learned something, but and we grew from it. But like maybe there are better ways in the future that we can go about doing it. So
but
it really
try
is
something.
right.
Right partner,
it is about trying and like definitely working together with other people, not doing things by yourself. That's how I pretty much do everything. Is I collaborate with a lot of other people and make sure that the work that I'm doing and the work that they're doing is celebrated.
Awesome. Catt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yay.
We have a full day of programming coming up, so while we're wrapping up now, stay tuned. We have a whole bunch of folks coming on next, including Sarah Stewart, Liz Jackson, and Shannon Finnegan. So stay tuned.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks
Yay,
again, Catt.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Battle.